Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well. I hope you had a good Easter. This week is my birthday week, so I'm going to do a kind of a folklore type urban legend, kind of mythology type story that I mentioned before. This story comes all the way from Botswana, and our guy here is South African. And I'll get into the story in a second, but I just want to say that you can like and subscribe. If you want to support the channel, you can donate to the Patreon. If even you just watching and liking the video helps a lot, to be honest. So yeah, pull up a stump with me and let's get into the video. And just to clarify real quick, in case anybody gets confused, I'm not South African, I'm Canadian. I'm going to be telling the story from the guy's point of view, as that's how it's written. So yeah, he's South African, I'm not, so just in case anybody gets that a little confused. So I'm South African, and I'm going on this trip to Botswana. My sister is marrying a guy who's a game ranger, and I'm going on this trip to spend time with the dude and try to get to know him. I'm supposed to be the best man in the wedding, even though I barely know the guy. I arrive after a really long drive, spend the first day drinking and driving bikes and everything like that, kind of just having a great time. The next day, my sister's fiance suggests that we go driving around the outskirts of and I hope I'm saying this right, the Okavango Delta, in an attempt to see some wildlife. And I'm like, yeah, sure, let's go. So we go driving around and manage to spot some giraffes, a leopard, some hippos, and some crazy birds. It's really fun, but it's really hot out. There's no elephants spotted. This is a detail that comes up later. Eventually, we head back to the place that we're staying at each night. We start to cook and drink, and my sister's fiancé, who I'll call John, gets a call as the sun's going down. I notice how weirded out he is by what he's being told on the phone. He hangs up, but definitely seems freaked out as we eat dinner. I ask what's up, but John just kinda dismisses it, says it's nothing too serious. After dinner, we start drinking more and more. John starts ranting about his boss, that's who was on the phone earlier. He says that they found some dead elephants and he wants John to check it out. John tells him it's too dark to see anything, but he'll go tomorrow. John apologizes to me, tells me he'll be busy working. I say it's not really a problem, but him, kinda drunk, feels really bad. Says we're supposed to be bonding during this, but now he's leaving me in a terrible little chalet with no company. After a few more beers, however, John tells me that I should come along with him tomorrow. I'm kinda reluctant as I don't love the idea of inspecting dead elephants, but John insists and says though that we'll go by helicopter. He says it'll be much better than driving in the heat, so at this point I agree to go along. The next day we eat breakfast and head up to a small airstrip. The helicopter looks rickety as hell, but I figured that complaining would be a little rude. There are lots of pre-flight procedures, and we end up taking off just after midday. We fly around for about an hour, able to search a huge amount of the area very quickly. There's me, John, another ranger, and a dude who I think was a ranger in training, and then the pilot. John and the ranger have tranq rifles ready in case they need to inspect a live elephant up close. And then we finally spot something. It's about 3 elephants lying in the sun. We land a few meters away and hop out. The stench is absolutely horrible. There's flies everywhere. These are corpses that are half rotten and they're kinda half eaten. I think it's kinda weird that there's 3 elephants dead together, but not too shocking beyond that. John and the others are discussing something. Conversation seemed pretty intense, to be honest. I try to join the conversation so I don't seem like the silent guy of the group, kinda lurking in the background, kind of creepy. So I'm guessing some poachers shot them, huh? Everyone looks at me and they all seem extremely annoyed. I think they were pissed that John invited a normie who didn't know anything about these animals along with them. Eventually, John says, "Doesn't seem like poachers. The elephants still have their tusks." I hadn't thought of that, and now I just feel really stupid. They keep inspecting the bodies, and both rangers seemed really interested in one of the smaller ones. It was lying on its side, but its face was pointed at an odd angle towards the ground, like it had been trying to stick its head in the ground. Finally, the other ranger suggests that we keep looking to see if there's any others. We get back up into the air and fly around for about another hour or so. The ranger seems really troubled, but we see nothing much of interest. We land and they have another conversation about what to do next, while I just sit there awkwardly in the helicopter with my feet hanging out. We have some lunch and John informs me that we're going to do one more search before heading back, as we only have fuel for about another hour or so, and we were flying back and forth, so we're only about 45 minutes from the airstrip. Before we finish eating, I overhear a ranger tell John that a smaller elephant seemed like it had a broken neck or something. I blurt out, "How does that happen?" The ranger just glares at me and I keep eating. We finish eating and then take off again and continue searching. After about 30 minutes or so, the pilot tells us that we're heading back and turns toward home, but just 5 minutes later, the ranger in training starts pointing and shouting. Lying on the ground near a clearing of trees, there are about a dozen dead elephants. The sun's going down and the shadows from their corpses are easy to see, stretching along the ground. We land nearby and make our way over. The smell is even worse than last time, to be honest, and the bodies are just ruined. I'm not much of a nature lover, so I don't know exactly what animals can do to other animals. Even so, I could tell that some bodies had been picked at by scavengers. Their stomachs were torn open and their intestines spewed out everywhere. Again, all the tusks were present. I asked John if maybe someone had shot them just for the hell of it. He says probably not. To kill this many, you need a helicopter to fire from above, and when that happens, like when they're tranked, they form a circle around the younger ones, but these bodies were all spread over a distance of a kilometer or two, like they had been running away in a full-on panic. He then pointed out the state of some of the other bodies. A couple had feet and legs missing, which may be possible after being chewed on for a few days, but I can't imagine why some lions and hyenas would go for the legs and feet first, while leaving the stomach untouched. After some inspecting, we all ended up standing around the body of a smaller elephant, maybe kind of a teenager who was missing its head. I don't mean like its skin and flesh had been picked off by birds and wild dogs. I mean its head, neck, and right shoulder were completely gone, like it had been pulled apart. Also, while this body was smaller, it was still probably a couple tons and twice the height of a human. I actually wondered if someone had magically fed this thing like a stick of dynamite and it blew up. At this point, John and the other ranger are swearing and ranting about how screwed up this all is. I think the rest of us all knew that they were using anger to cover up their growing confusion and worry. After I let them vent a little while, I ask what we do now. The other ranger snaps at me and says we're going to go home and try to figure out how to explain this to the Department of Environmental Affairs. We all start to head back to the helicopter when the ranger in training says, "What about the hole?" We all turn to him and look at John, and John says, "What hole?" The ranger in training starts leading us toward a small hill and says, "I thought you guys saw it when we flew overhead." Sure enough, there in the side of the hill is a hole, dug at maybe a 15 or 20 degree downward angle. This thing is massive and it looks like a molehill, except it's as big as a subway tunnel. I asked John what I'm looking at here, still thinking that this is some kind of natural phenomena I never heard about, but he just mumbles something and says he has no idea. Finally, the pilot asks if we're going in, and I think, are you serious? What did this man just say? I just look at him like he's crazy, and I think, why the hell would we go in there? Luckily, the other ranger says, "Nah, it's almost dark. Let's just take some pictures and get back. We'll report this and let someone else figure it out." I'm beginning to like this guy. We start walking back. The pilot and I take our time checking the bodies some more because the other three are taking pictures and there's not really any hurry. Although I did feel really creeped out. I didn't really say anything. Eventually, we all end up back at the helicopter and we get inside, except for the ranger who has climbed up on the body and is taking his last pictures. For some reason, I only noticed then how silent it is. There's no animals except flies, which I thought was weird considering how much raw meat was present. As the ranger jumps off the body and starts heading back, we all hear this massive grating noise. It sounded like something huge was shifting against the sand. I immediately assumed that one of the elephants is still alive and is trying to stand up. We all pile out of the helicopter and make our way towards the noise. I can't see anything because the light is fading fast and the horizon is dotted with giant elephant carcasses. I notice John and the others are making their way to the top of some bodies. I jump into a nearby, fairly intact corpse to get a better vantage point. As I crest the elephant, never thought I'd ever have to type that sentence, I stare out at the black silhouette lying on the ground against the afternoon sky. For a while I see nothing, but suddenly my eyes pick up movement. At first I think it's just something coming out of the hole. I'm thinking like the big worm from Dune or something like that as I tactically crap my pants. Then I notice what seems to be an elephant trying to drag itself into the hole. John and the other ranger are already down the carcasses and heading for the hole, and the rest of us are following. I'm not sure why. Maybe we just wanted to see a living elephant after all these dead ones. I won't pretend it was rational, and I can't speak for the others. I just feel like if we saw this thing close up, we might be able to get some understanding of what was going on here. At this point, the light was dying fast, and a lot of detail was lost in the shadow of the tunnel. But I swear to God, I saw enough to know that I wasn't imagining anything. Standing at the entrance to the hole is a person, crouched over like a gorilla. The hair was long and matted, and they were completely naked, but the real problem was their size. This person was crouched over the elephant. Their body was actually slightly cramped in this subway-sized hole, like the elephant's body looked like a big gray dog to this literal giant. Its proportions were completely screwed up. Its top half was stretched out in spidery thin arms, as long as a truck, kind of folded down so that it could fit inside the tunnel, ending in these wiry fingers with needle-like claws. Meanwhile, its bottom half was all stubby and emaciated. This thing's legs were human enough in appearance, but the size of a fully grown man, but they were withered compared to the rest of the body, and they almost seemed vegetative. We got there just to see it as it was getting back into the tunnel. What had seemed like an elephant crawling into the hole had actually been an elephant being dragged by the leg into the earth. We all stood there in abject horror as this thing pulled at the elephant's corpse like a sack of potatoes. We hadn't made a sound, but at some point it turned its head around, not like it heard something, but rather like it was a wild animal checking its surroundings from time to time. Its eyes immediately snapped toward us. This thing's face was so screwed up. The eyes were white and milky, but I could tell it saw us. The nose was upturned like a bat, and its mouth hung slightly open as it breathed, revealing massive stab-like teeth like something you'd see in a hippo's mouth. They were all crooked and some protruded at odd angles, but they looked as hard as steel, and I could immediately imagine them being torn through the legs and heads of the bodies we had seen so far. The strangest part was the shape of its head. It seemed disfigured and bulbous, like a fetus's skull. It also bent in on one side, like a little more than the other. The best way I can describe it is like the lady from the painting in It, except wider and obviously far larger. The skin was veiny, although its shoulders were back and were covered in dirt, as white as a sheet, almost to the point of being translucent. The skin around its eyes had enough wrinkles to almost act like eyebrows, which gave it a very surprised, slightly confused look. After a split second of confusion, this thing's face contorts to the look of absolute rage. It lets out this awful roar. Sounds almost like the scream of a deaf person might make, sort of low and monotone, but it's loud enough that my hands instinctively slam to my ears to try and block out the sound. We all start sprinting toward the helicopter. John's shouting something, but my ears are just ringing at this point, and everything is too muffled to make out. We all climb into the helicopter in complete terror. I strap myself in and look back towards the hole. This giant monster is clawing its way toward us. It's clearly moving as fast as it can, but it's actually extremely slow. Its back legs are just kind of dragging along limply, and it's only moving by clawing at the ground and other elephant corpses. It moves like someone who's paralyzed from the waist down. We all just sit there petrified and stare at it while the pilot starts the helicopter. I remember watching it grab at one of the larger elephants to try and use it as an anchor to pull itself along, but the elephant corpse literally slid towards it, like an elephant corpse wasn't heavy enough for it to use as a weight. The helicopter starts to lift off and this thing reaches out for us. It's still a long ways away, but it came a hell of a lot closer than I would have thought possible. Its whole body is probably longer than 2 school buses, placed end to end. The ranger fires his tranq gun at it, but honestly I didn't even see if it hit it or not, although I'd be amazed if he missed that thing. We don't stay around. The pilot turns the helicopter towards home, and we shoot back faster than I thought possible. I think I heard another dull roar as we flew away, but my ears were still ringing too much to be certain. The rest of the night was a blur. I don't remember much of the conversations after we landed, but I wasn't content with being back at the chalet. I just felt like that thing was still crawling toward us, and in the night it would eventually smash through the little wooden chalet I was in. I told John I was leaving right away, and I drove for 6 hours before pulling into a petrol station and falling asleep in my car. When I woke up the next morning, I kept driving until I got home. I got in the shower and just stood there under the water for about an hour. Eventually I called John and we spoke for a while about everything that had happened. Apparently they had got a massive group together to go search the area, but when they arrived they only found 8 bodies and the hole was partially collapsed. Over the next few weeks, John told me about the attempts to track down whatever that thing was, but eventually they gave up, and some of the other rangers started to think that maybe that they just had a few too many beers and came up with all this stuff to cover up for being drunk. Apparently he had quite a few arguments over it, especially over what happened that night. Elephant corpses keep showing up near the holes, but nobody's willing to go into them to see what's inside. After another week or 2, John quit that job, and now he's working as a delivery man. And you're probably wondering why you haven't heard about this. Well, you can find some stories about it, but most of them attribute the deaths to some kind of pandemic that spread through the population. You'll also notice that they omit most of the pictures, and they only show you pictures of the more intact elephants, so that you don't wonder how such massive creatures can get torn limb from limb, and they'll never show you the holes dug in and out of the ground. Here's an article though, in case you're interested. And I haven't read the article. That's just because I just enjoyed the story enough to just make a video about it right off. But the article is from The Guardian from September 3rd, 2020, and the article was called "Why Are Elephants Dying? The Race to Solve the Mystery of Mass Die-Offs -AOE." So you can see why that I group this under like urban legend, mythology, kind of things like that. But for me, it doesn't really matter if people think it's real or fake. I enjoyed it, so I hope you did too. And if you did, then make sure to like and subscribe. And you can leave a comment and say how much you liked it. You can leave a comment for suggestions of other videos. I'm going to do a Dogman Stories video here as soon as I collect enough good stories for it. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for pulling up a stump, and thank you for watching. Have a good night.